Another aspect that's key towards building a client-server application is defining how the communication patterns are going to work between your client and your server. Now, this is not something Java gets to dictate. This is not something that you're going to be handed a guide on how to make this happen. You can copy things. You can use other patterns you'll see from somewhere, but this is entirely up to you to communicate how this is going to happen. So if our two different applications we're going to build, two computer programs we're going to build, are going to talk to each other, they need to understand what the data they're sending is. It all comes by as 10, 110, 10110, or whatever the data stream is going to be. And so I have to understand, what do I do with that data? Is there just one thing I'm receiving, or is there multiple different options of the things I could be receiving? What's that communication look like? So think of it this way. And I call into a phone number, let's say a car dealer. I could be buying a car, I could be leasing a car, I could be renting a car, I could be getting car repairs, I could be getting car repairs. I just said it twice. All those different things could be happening. So do I have different phone numbers I call each one of them on, or do I go there and ask for that service? Or does the person at the front desk handle all of those services, and I can ask them for any of these things? That's the type of thing you have to understand about your protocol here, about the way things are going to work. So one of the options here is to have a conversation. I call the place and say, hey, this is what I want. Oh, okay, what else can I do for you? If that's the option, that's the way we do. So each sentence inside of there, if you will, is giving me more information. So the client and the server is what's called stateful. When I talk to the receptionist, I give them more information, and they make wiser and wiser choices based off the previous things I've told them. This can be really easy, or this can be really hard, depending on the depth of conversations. But remember, this is computer stuff. I don't necessarily have to go back and forth. I can give them a bunch of information all at once. I can talk for 10 minutes and they'll remember every bit of it, as opposed to a person which probably wouldn't. So I can also have these big, large commands that I send over to them. I have to just make sure I'm communicating everything I want to. So an example from an app we could be building, for an app we would be sending, is I want to open a file. And the file is named foo.txt. The server could say something like, I don't have foo.txt. That could be one conversation we could have. Another conversation we could have is say, I want to open a file bar.txt. And the server can say, oh, I have file bar.txt. Here's the contents. Now notice the same request could have two totally different responses. I have to be able to interpret both ways, what I send in and what I get back, based off of the context, based off of what I asked, based off of what information is out there. So this comes down to the notion of the way we handle files. Typically in a file, I open it one line at a time, and I have to read that line and figure out what the context is. And based off that line, I might have to do something else in the contents to break it down further, or maybe have to read the next couple lines or something along those lines. No puns intended. What if instead we're doing real-time communication? I can send more robust information. What if I can send the context and the whole message instead of just text? Instead of saying, I want to open up this file and then have to get it back, what if I can just give you an object that says, I want to do this, 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 and this. I want to open a file, add this information, delete it, and then wipe it all clean. What if I can send, in short, higher forms of data along the way between these guys? So you may or may not have gotten past your basic text file communication in previous class, but if you did, you might remember these I/O helper classes that we got inside of there. There's a series of buffers and filters we went out there. We saw a little bit in the previous video. It's the buffered reader and the print writer as different examples of them. These are mostly around, like those two, handling text files, but there's more advanced ones that allows us to deal with sending whole objects, whole data structures, whole everything across the internet to another machine and be able to have them pick up an object just like it was here. It's kind of like, instead of me sending you a letter about, describing, a picture I saw, that I could not even just send you a scan of the picture, the whole thing would appear on you. You'd have the picture in full form, printed out, ready to go. That's kind of what we're talking about here. It's teleporting, if you will, an object from one computer to another. So the key to this is we need to create an object that represents that information. So in this guy, we have an info object. And it has two pieces of information we're going to send, a message and a sender. Who's the sender of this? So you can think of an email. I not only send you some text, I also send you who's sending you the text. Getters, setters, you can even have behavior there if you want to. The key to this is I create this object to implement an interface called serializable. So in Java in general, there's a rule that says if you're in a Java application, you can't be outside of a Java application. That's a security rule. I can't just take your credit card number stored in an object and send it someplace else. But if I do want to allow an object to be sent over, I create it as being serializable, which is the flag to Java say, hey, forget that security rule. Go ahead and send this over. We're willing to share this data with another machine, on a file, whatever. So within our socket server we built in the previous demo, we can extend that out. And instead of reading text and writing text, we can read and write objects. Now, the socket stuff is exactly the same. You see, I have a socket with the port number 55 on it, and then I have an accept on there. And in this case, I'm actually going to receive a bunch of objects. I'm going to do this over and over again. I've thrown the while in there as well to keep looping around that. So when I go through and I've set this up, I have my input stream to come in, I have the objects that are coming in, and I have when I read it in, I'm getting, instead of a text line that I have to parse, I'm getting in a whole info object. Now this info object that you see here on this line right here, this is the object I created up here, this info object. I create this, it's got a message, a sender, everything else inside there. So when I read it in, so my input stream's coming from the socket, I've opened up into an object input stream here. And when I say read object from that, it's not just reading a couple bits, it's not just reading a couple text characters, it's reading in a whole object, and it's turning that into my info object. And then now, that info object, after a quick little bit of casting right here, this turns it from random object into an info object, I can do things like get message, get sender. It behaves exactly like that object. I can completely deal with this as if that object was always on my, I created it, I called the constructor, I set it all up. This is a monumental shift in the capabilities it gives me. So now, instead of having to deal with abstract files and protocols and everything else like that, I say to you, let's swap objects. I'm going to send you this request object, and you return with this response object. And that object can have all sorts of information in it. It can have error codes and success codes, and it can have data, it can have extra data, it can have messages, it can have, I can send you 10 different things at once to do if I want to. And instead of saying, insert this one line into our database, I can say insert this whole set of 10 lines in the database, or 100 lines, or whoever knows how many lines. It really opens up the possibilities of what I can do. And on this client side, it becomes really, really nice, because what I can do is, again, I have my socket, I'm going to connect to a server in the socket, all that's exactly the same. Instead of connecting via text, I'm creating an output stream here with the object output stream. So over here you can say I have an object input stream. Out here I have an object output stream. It's ones and zeros that represents an object. And so I go through and I create my objects just like I normally would. Constructor, info objects, sender's Tony, messages hi, it is now, and whatever today's date is. And then I write that object out. I don't have to comma separate, I don't have to put them on separate lines, I don't have to do any sort of formatting of this. I don't have to turn it into text at all, no toStrings, no rendering of that stuff. I just take the whole object and send it over. Gotta flush it. Got to remember to flush it there at the end, and then it sends it over. So the difference here is all the work we had to do in file I/O to parse text in and to write text out in a specific format, we don't care about, because we never actually render this stuff in a static medium. So object input and output streams don't work well to write to a file because it's based off of compiled code. And if a month from now I change the compiled code, all the files that I had saved I couldn't read anymore. So that's a bad part about object input and output stream. But for real-time communications, it's perfect. You've got the compiled code, I got the compiled code, we're both running. Boom, we go off, we do our thing, we can share objects back and forth without having to do any extra coding inside of that. And so we're going to see this in action again, once again in the demo. And then from that, we'll go off and start building what a whole client-server application would look like. But this is a key piece of it now, is you need to go off and design what your protocol is going to look like. Either a series of text messages back and forth that we're going to send, or even better, give us a whole object, and I can send that information over, I can get information back. It's up to you to design that, but you'll see some examples of that when we get to demo.